The sharp clatter of a fork against fine china silenced the upscale restaurant as Tessa Foster stared down the older gentleman who had just loudly remarked, "These entitled trust fund babies think they own the world." Her emerald eyes narrowed slightly, but her composure remained unshaken. 15 years running Foster Technologies had taught her to weather far worse storms than a stranger's rudeness. "Sir, with all due respect, your comment was both unprovoked and inappropriate," came a deep voice from the next table. Tessa turned to see a man in his early 30s with a little girl who couldn't be more than 6 sitting across from him. Unlike most patrons in this 5-star establishment, his clothes were clean but well-worn, his watch clearly functional rather than fashionable. "Mind your own business," the older man huffed. The stranger rose slightly from his seat. "I'm teaching my daughter about respect." "Perhaps you could use a refresher course yourself." Tessa watched as the little girl tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy, you always say we shouldn't judge people without knowing them." Something in Tessa's chest tightened at the simple wisdom. The older gentleman muttered something about the help defending each other before signaling for his check. Tessa took a sip of her water, trying not to stare at the father who had unexpectedly defended her. His jawline was strong, his shoulders broad beneath his department store button-down. But it was the gentleness with which he spoke to his daughter that truly caught her attention. When the waiter approached his table with the check, Tessa noticed how the man carefully counted out bills from a worn leather wallet. Without thinking, she gestured to her server. "I'd like to cover their meal," she said quietly. "Anonymously, please." The server nodded. "Of course, Miss Foster." Tessa watched as the father and daughter rose to leave. The little girl skipped ahead while her father spoke with their waiter. She saw his expression change from confusion to something like pride as he shook his head. "Please, I can't accept that," she heard him say. Tessa made a split-second decision and stood, walking over to their table. "I insist," she said. "You stood up for a stranger today." That kind of integrity deserves recognition. Up close, his eyes were startlingly blue, crinkled at the corners from what must be frequent smiling. "Zach Lockhart," he said, extending his hand. "And this is my daughter, Emma." "Tessa Foster," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused the hand of someone who worked hard for a living. "Are you famous?" Emma asked, wide-eyed. Tessa laughed. "Not famous, just fortunate. And your dad reminded me that fortune comes with responsibility." "He's the best dad ever," Emma declared. "He builds things, and he makes the best pancakes, and he never ever yells." "Is that so?" Tessa smiled, charmed by the child's enthusiasm. "Emma, remember what we said about oversharing?" Zach's cheeks colored slightly. "It's not oversharing if it's true," Emma countered with impeccable 6-year-old logic. Tessa found herself laughing again, a genuine laugh that she realized had been absent from her life for too long. "Well, I won't keep you. Thank you again for speaking up." "Anyone would have done the same," Zach said. "No," Tessa said softly. "They wouldn't have. Have a good evening, Mr. Lockhart." As they left, Tessa returned to her table, surprised to find herself still smiling. She opened her laptop to review the quarterly reports she'd brought to dinner. But her thoughts kept drifting to kind blue eyes, and the man who'd defend a stranger without knowing she was one of the wealthiest women in the city. 2 days later, Tessa found herself driving through a neighborhood far from her penthouse apartment. After much deliberation, she'd had her assistant track down Zach Lockhart's information. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but she couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting had been significant somehow. She parked her understated Audi in front of a modest construction company with Lockhart Renovations painted on the window. Through the glass, she could see Zach at a desk, frowning at paperwork. Before she could lose her nerve, Tessa stepped out and entered the small office. A bell above the door jingled, and Zach looked up, his expression changing from professional courtesy to surprise. "Miss Foster." He stood quickly, nearly knocking over his coffee mug. "How did you—" "I'm sorry for showing up unannounced," she said quickly. and I realized tracking down your business might seem. She hesitated, suddenly unsure, stalkerish. He supplied, but his tone was light, and the corner of his mouth turned up. I was going to say forward, she replied with a small smile, but I have a proposition for you. A business one, she added hastily. I'm renovating a building downtown, turning it into a community center. I've been looking for the right contractor, someone with skill and integrity. Zach's eyebrows rose. And you thought of me because I stood up to a rude guy in a restaurant. Character matters in business partnerships, Tessa said simply, and your website showcases impressive work. Now he looked genuinely surprised. You looked at my website? Of course, I don't make uninformed decisions. She pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with just her name and number. The full proposal is being sent to your email. Take some time to review it. This would be a significant project. Zach took the card, studying it for a moment. Community center, huh? For at-risk youth. A place for after-school programs, job training, counseling services. She paused. I believe in investing in people. Something in his expression softened. That's really admirable. It's practical, she countered. Communities thrive when people have opportunities, he nodded slowly. I'll review the proposal tonight. As Tessa turned to leave, Zach cleared his throat. Miss Foster, for what it's worth, I had no idea who you were at the restaurant. I just didn't like how that guy was talking. That's exactly why I'm here, Mr. Lockhart. That evening, Zach sat at his kitchen table after Emma had gone to bed, staring at the proposal on his laptop screen. The figures made his head spin. This was easily 10 times larger than any project he'd ever handled. His phone buzzed with a text from his sister. Did you see the news? That was the Tessa Foster who came to your office today, as in Foster Technologies. As in Forbes 30 under 30. As in Billionaire, Zach? He quickly Googled her name, and his stomach dropped as image after image appeared. Tessa at charity galas, Tessa speaking at tech conferences, Tessa accepting awards. The most recent headline read, Foster Technologies CEO continues revolutionary clean energy push. What is she doing offering me this job? He muttered to himself. His phone rang, displaying an unknown number. Heart pounding, he answered. Mr. Lockhart, it's Tessa Foster. I realize I may have overwhelmed you with that proposal. Zach laughed nervously. You could say that. I usually renovate kitchens and build decks, Miss Foster, not multi-million-dollar community centers. Call me Tessa, please. There was a pause. And I understand your hesitation, but sometimes the best person for a job isn't the one with the biggest company, but the one with the right values. I appreciate the vote of confidence, but what if we start smaller? She suggested. There's a youth shelter on Maple Street that needs renovation. Consider it a trial run. Zach hesitated, then thought of Emma asleep in her small bedroom. Since Sarah had died 3 years ago, he'd worked tirelessly to provide stability for their daughter. An opportunity like this could change everything. Okay, he said finally. I'll take on the shelter renovation. Excellent, Tessa replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. And perhaps you and Emma would join me for dinner this weekend. To discuss the details, of course. Zach found himself agreeing before he could overthink it. Friday evening found him and Emma standing outside an upscale restaurant again, but this time with a reservation. Is this the lady who said I was cute? Emma asked, straightening the dress she'd insisted on wearing. She said your defense of me was cute, Zach corrected, adjusting his tie. He'd bought it specifically for tonight, determined not to look completely out of place. And she's very rich. Emma, he warned. Remember, we don't judge people by their money, good or bad. I know, Daddy, she sighed. Just like we don't judge books by their covers. Inside, Tessa was already seated at a corner table. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. Zach was struck again by how classically beautiful she was. You came, she said, standing to greet them. We said we would, Zach replied simply. Throughout dinner, Zach watched as Tessa engaged Emma in conversation, asking about school and friends without talking down to her. She seemed genuinely interested in his daughter's opinions on everything from dinosaurs to the best flavor of ice cream. "My mommy's in heaven," Emma informed Tessa matter-of-factly over dessert. "She got very sick." Tessa's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that, Emma. My mom is in heaven too." "Really? Do you think they're friends up there?" "I bet they are," Tessa said gently, her eyes meeting Zach's over Emma's head. Later, after Emma had excused herself to the restroom with a server escorting her, Zach leaned forward. "I'm sorry about that. She doesn't usually bring up Sarah so directly with people we've just met." "Don't apologize," Tessa said. "She's processing, and she's lucky to have you to help her through it." "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," he admitted. "Being both parents isn't easy. From what I can see, you're doing an extraordinary job." Tessa hesitated. "My father died when I was 12. My mother tried her best, but Foster Technologies consumed her. By the time she died 5 years ago, I'd already been running the company for 2 years. I had no idea," Zach said softly. "Not many people do. The business world prefers to see me as the fortunate heiress who lucked into success." "Is that what that man at the restaurant was implying?" Zach asked. Tessa nodded. "It happens more often than you'd think." "Well, he was wrong," Zach said firmly. "Anyone who reads about your work would know that." A flush crept up Tessa's cheeks. "You've been researching me." "Turnabout is fair play," he said with a small smile. "You vetted me first, remember?" Emma returned then, effectively ending their private conversation. But as they were leaving, Tessa touched Zach's arm lightly. "Would you two like to join me tomorrow? There's a street fair in the park, very casual, I promise." "Can we, Daddy?" Emma bounced on her toes. Looking at his daughter's excited face, and then at Tessa's hopeful expression, Zach found he couldn't say no. The street fair was crowded but festive, with colorful booths lining the pathways. Zach watched in amazement as Tessa, dressed in jeans and a simple blouse, blended seamlessly with the crowd. No one seemed to recognize the billionaire CEO in their midst. "Cotton candy," Emma exclaimed, pointing to a vendor. "May I?" Tessa asked Zach, already reaching for her wallet. "You don't have to keep buying things for us," he said quietly. Tessa looked at him directly. "I know I don't have to. I want to. There's a difference." As the day progressed, Zach found himself relaxing. Tessa was nothing like he'd expected. She laughed freely, ate street food without complaint, and seemed genuinely content to spend time with him and Emma. When Emma wanted to try the ring toss game, Tessa joined her, both of them failing spectacularly but giggling all the same. "She's wonderful with her," observed an elderly woman sitting next to Zach on a bench. "Your wife has such a lovely way with your daughter." "Oh, she's not Zach began, but the woman had already moved on. He looked at Tessa helping Emma aim at another game, her hands gently guiding his daughter's. Something warm unfurled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The shelter renovation began the following week. Zach was determined to prove himself worthy of Tessa's trust, arriving early each day and staying late to ensure every detail was perfect. To his surprise, Tessa often stopped by, sometimes bringing coffee for his crew or lunch for the two of them. "You don't need to supervise," he told her one afternoon as they sat on sawhorses, eating sandwiches. "I won't cut corners." "I'm not supervising," she said. "I enjoy watching the transformation, and the company isn't bad either." Over the next few weeks, a pattern emerged. Tessa would visit the site. They would talk about the project initially, but increasingly about their lives, their hopes, their pasts. She joined him and Emma for simple dinners at their home, teaching Emma to make pasta from scratch one evening, the three of them covered in flour and laughing. Zach found himself looking forward to her texts, her calls, her visits, but he was also acutely aware of the vast differences in their worlds. One rainy Thursday, Tessa arrived at the shelter looking uncharacteristically stressed. Zach led her to the small office he'd set up on site. "What's wrong?" he asked, closing the door. "Board meeting," she sighed. They want to sell off our renewable energy division. It's not profitable enough yet, apparently. Zach frowned. But isn't that the division developing solar panels for low-income housing? Tessa looked at him in surprise. You remember that? Of course. You talked about it last week, how it could cut utility costs for families by 60%. She smiled, tension visibly leaving her shoulders. You really listened. I always listen to you, Tessa. Something shifted in the air between them. Tessa stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. Zach, his phone rang sharply, breaking the moment. It was Emma's school. She had a fever and needed to be picked up immediately. Go, Tessa said. We'll talk later. That night, as Zach sat beside Emma's bed, monitoring her temperature, his phone lit up with a text from Tessa. How is she? He typed back. Sleeping now, doctor says just a virus. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. I wish I could help. Zach hesitated, then wrote, You already do. More than you know. 3 days later, Emma was back at school, and Zach was installing cabinets at the shelter when Tessa arrived with her driver. She wore a business suit and looked every inch the powerful CEO. The board agreed, she announced without preamble. The renewable energy division stays, and we're expanding the low-income housing initiative. That's fantastic, Zach said, truly happy for her. How did you convince them? I reminded them that long-term vision sometimes requires short-term sacrifice. She paused. And I may have threatened to use my controlling interest to restructure the board if necessary. Zach laughed. Remind me never to negotiate against you. Actually, she said, suddenly looking nervous, I was hoping you might negotiate with me on something else. She took a deep breath. The community center project, I'd like you to take it on. Tessa, that's a massive undertaking. My company is just me and 3 guys. I know. That's why I've arranged financing for you to expand, hire more crews, get the equipment you need. She held up a hand as he started to protest. It's a business loan, Zach. Fair terms. You'd be doing me a favor. I need someone I trust for this project. He studied her face. Is that all this is? Business? Tessa met his gaze steadily. No, and I think you know that. That evening, after careful consideration, Zach called her. I'll take the project, he said, but on one condition. Name it. No special treatment. I get the job because I'm the best person for it, not because of whatever is happening between us. There was a pause. Fair enough. And what exactly do you think is happening between us, Zach? His heart pounded. I think I'm falling for someone who lives in a completely different world than I do, someone who could have anyone she wanted. Maybe I've already found who I want, she said softly. The following Saturday, Tessa invited them to her home for the first time. Zach had expected a mansion, but the penthouse apartment, while undeniably luxurious, felt surprisingly warm and personal. Bookshelves lined the walls, and family photos sat on side tables. It's like a princess castle in the sky, Emma exclaimed, running to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Tessa laughed. It's just home to me. After dinner, Emma fell asleep on the couch during a movie. Zach carried her to the guest room Tessa had prepared, tucking her in gently. When he returned to the living room, Tessa was standing by the windows, silhouetted against the city lights. He joined her, both of them watching the glittering skyline in comfortable silence. You know, Tessa finally said, that first night at the restaurant, I'd been sitting there feeling oddly empty. Success without connection isn't really success at all. And now, Zach asked quietly, she turned to face him. Now I look forward to each day in a way I haven't since I was a child. You and Emma, you've reminded me what matters. Zach reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. You've changed our lives too, Tessa. I don't want to change your lives, she whispered. I want to be part of them. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, she met him halfway, their lips connecting in a kiss that felt like coming home. Her hands came up to rest against his chest, and his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, Tessa's eyes were shining. I've been waiting for you to do that for weeks. I wasn't sure if I was reading things right, he admitted. "You're Tessa Foster, and I'm just—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Don't diminish yourself. You're the man who stood up for a stranger because it was right. You're the father who's raising an incredible daughter with love and wisdom. You're the person I think about first thing every morning and last thing every night." Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Tessa, and it terrifies me because our worlds are so different. Then we'll build a new world," she said simply. "Together." The shelter renovation was completed ahead of schedule and under budget. The ribbon-cutting ceremony attracted local news, with Tessa giving a speech about community investment while Zach stood proudly with his crew. Emma, wearing a hard hat Tessa had specially made for her, helped cut the ribbon. As construction began on the community center, Zach's company grew. He hired more workers, invested in better equipment, and began taking on additional projects. But he was careful to maintain the values that had built his reputation: quality work, fair prices, and treating people with respect. Tessa, meanwhile, continued to reshape Foster Technologies, pushing for more socially responsible initiatives. The press began to notice her frequent appearances with local contractor Zach Lockhart and his daughter, speculation growing about their relationship. "Does it bother you?" she asked Zach one evening as they prepared dinner in his kitchen. "Being in the spotlight because of me?" He considered the question as he chopped vegetables. "Not for myself. I worry about Emma, though." "I've been thinking about that," Tessa said. "My childhood changed when my father's company took off. The sudden attention, the scrutiny, I don't want Emma to experience that. What do you suggest? Boundaries, privacy, and being very clear with her about what's real and what's just noise." Zach nodded. "She asked me last week if you were going to be her new mommy." Tessa's hands stilled. "What did you tell her?" "That we care about each other very much, but grown-up relationships take time." Tessa moved closer, sliding her arms around his waist from behind. "And what if I said I want to be in both your lives permanently?" Zach turned to face her. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying I love you, Zach. I love Emma, and I don't want to waste time pretending this isn't exactly where I want to be." 6 months after their first meeting, the community center was nearing completion. Zach had insisted on handling many of the finishing touches himself, particularly the central gathering space that had been Tessa's personal vision. One Saturday, he brought Emma to the site, telling her they needed to check on some final details. When they arrived, Tessa was waiting in the center of the main hall, which had been transformed. Fairy lights hung from exposed beams, and a small table was set for 3. "What's this?" Zach asked, taking in the unexpected scene. "A celebration," Tessa said, approaching them both. She knelt to Emma's level first. "Emma, I wanted to ask you something very important. I love your daddy very much, and I love you too. Would it be okay with you if I asked your daddy to marry me?" Emma's eyes widened. "You want to marry Daddy?" "Very much," Tessa said, "but only if you're okay with it." Emma looked thoughtful. "Would you live with us, and would I call you Mom?" "I would love to live with you both, and you can call me whatever feels right to you whenever you're ready." Emma threw her arms around Tessa's neck. "Yes, Daddy, say yes." Tessa stood, facing Zach with tears in her eyes. "Well, what do you say, Zachary Lockhart? Will you marry me? Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Your world is empty without you in it," she finished. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about you, about Emma, about the life we can build together." Zach pulled her close. "Then yes. 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 months later in a private ceremony in the completed community center with Emma as their flower girl. The press caught wind of the event, of course, but the couple had agreed on a single statement. Tessa Foster, CEO of Foster Technologies, wed Zachary Lockhart, owner of Lockhart Construction, in a private ceremony surrounded by family and friends. The couple asks for privacy as they begin their life together. On their first anniversary, they moved into a new home, not Tessa's penthouse or Zach's modest house, but a place they had chosen together. Zach had renovated it himself, incorporating elements that mattered to both of them. Large windows like Tessa's apartment, a workshop for his projects, and a backyard where Emma could play. Lockhart Construction had grown into one of the city's premier renovation companies, specializing in sustainable building practices. Zach had insisted on earning his success, refusing to take advantage of his wife's connections unless it truly benefited their community work. Foster Technologies had launched its low-income solar initiative to national acclaim, with plans to expand internationally. Tessa had restructured her schedule to ensure family dinners were protected time, no matter what crisis emerged at work. Do you ever regret it? Zach asked one evening as they sat on their porch swing, watching Emma play with their new puppy on the lawn. Marrying someone so outside your world, Tessa leaned her head against his shoulder. I didn't marry outside my world, Zach. I married the man who helped me create the world I actually wanted to live in. Even with the tabloids occasionally calling you the billionaire who married the handyman, she laughed. I prefer the billionaire who found love when a kind father stood up for her. He kissed the top of her head. I'm still not sure what I did to deserve you. You were yourself, she said simply. The man who taught his daughter to respect others, the man who defends strangers without knowing their net worth, the man who builds things that last. As the sun set over their home, Emma ran up to them, the puppy bounding behind her. Daddy, Tessa, look what I found. She held up a perfect dandelion puff. Make a wish, Tessa urged her. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and blew. They watched the tiny seeds scatter on the evening breeze, carrying wishes into the gathering twilight. What did you wish for? Zach asked. Emma climbed up between them on the swing. I can't tell you or it won't come true, but I don't need to wish for a family anymore. I already have that. Tessa's eyes met Zach's over their daughter's head. In that moment, both knew that of all the things they'd built together, the shelter, the community center, his company, her legacy, this family was their greatest creation. 6 months later, when Tessa discovered she was pregnant, it was Emma who picked out the perfect shade of yellow for the nursery, declaring that her little brother or sister needed a sunny room. Zach painted it himself, while Tessa assembled the crib, insisting that she was perfectly capable despite her growing belly. They welcomed their son, Nathan, on a snowy winter morning. As Zach placed the baby in Emma's careful arms, with Tessa watching from her hospital bed, he marveled at how a chance encounter in a restaurant had led to this moment of perfect contentment. We're a real family now, Emma whispered, gently touching her brother's tiny fingers. We've always been a real family, Tessa corrected softly. Now we're just a bigger one. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a pristine blanket of white. Inside, wrapped in love that had begun with a rude comment and a father's instinct to stand up for what was right, the Lockhart family began a new chapter together.